So welcome to City Club. I have been really looking forward to today's presentation with our esteemed speaker, Garrett Epps. The topic, the Constitution, the Supreme Court, and the executive branch. Where are we today? Before we get started, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Allison Roberts, and I am excited to be the new board president of Bellingham City Club. I love our mission to inform, connect, and engage our community to strengthen the civic health of our region. And since 1993, we have emphasized civil conversations and listening to others. I'm curious about getting a feel for the crowd today, and especially for our speaker who might have an idea of who's here. So just with a raise of hands, folks from other Whatcom County cities. Raise your hands. From Bellingham? Whoop. Okay then. We are the Bellingham City Club, but we always welcome folks from other places as well. How about people in the legal profession? Raise your hands. Retired or otherwise? Okay, great. And then first timers to the Bellingham City Club. Welcome. Great, thank you for coming. We invite you to consider a membership for a great organization. How about members of the media? Do we have some here? A few? Yep, there and there. And then I would just like to recognize the charter members of the City Club. Are there any here, those people that had the vision to organize this group 27 years ago? One there and there. Thank you. Welcome and glad that you came here. So in this, of course, my computer does that. So in this beautiful venue, I also want to honor the land where we are today. It's on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin since time immemorial. Throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed, and I want to entreat everyone to recognize the beauty of this place and express our deepest respect and gratitude for our indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. As always, I'd also like to thank the volunteers, and many of them that make this program possible. In particular, our program committee. Will you raise your hands, program committee? Awesome. Who make this programming possible and work months in advance in order to bring our speakers. Let's see. I'd also like to remind you that it's embarrassing if your phone goes off during the presentation. So if you can please put it on stun or turn it off or whatever way you have, that would be wonderful. In the center of your tables are little table tents that acknowledge our sponsors, and I just have to say we heartfelt gratitude. These sponsors help us bring the City Club presentations to life. So Peace Health St. Joseph Medical Center, Baron Quinn Maxwell, Bruce and Claudia Descend, Danny Neal, real estate broker and Mulliot Group, Firehouse Arts and Events Center, Colshan CPAs, Opportunity Council, Pacific Continental Realty, Unity Care Northwest, Village Books. Thank you for coming today. Everyone give them a special applause. Western Washington University, the Whatcom Community Foundation, and the Salish Current. And a big thanks to our caterer today who really pulled out the stops to feed a large group. Let's give them a special round as well. Good Bowls and TTC are just wonderful. We're so grateful for them. So for those of you that aren't members, I'd like to encourage you to consider becoming a member. You can do it easily online, or there's applications in the middle of your table. on some of the tables. And you can take care of it back at the front desk there, or just go online and do it. It's $40 for an individual, $70 for a family, and that's for the whole year, and it gets you $5 off your meal. And also, next time, if you think this is a really great idea to bring friends, please do. Even though we are bursting at the seams, we love having a lot of people here. And if someone couldn't come, you can also go online. Did you know that? And see this very presentation and all the presentations going back 20 years on any topic we've ever had. And you can see it online. And please let your friends know if they weren't able to come today or get a registration, they can view it there. Probably starting next week, so not right away, because it takes a little while, doesn't it, Talking Crows, to put this all together. So, what's happening next month? Nearly a century ago, President Abe Lincoln predicted that someday America could see the rise of a strongman leader, hungry for power. Today, some wonder if Lincoln's prediction has come true. We expect that Hedrick Smith's presentation and return to Bellingham, yay, will be a sellout. So get your tickets, reservations in quickly. Hedrick Smith is he's known for many things, but he's a Pulitzer Prize and Emmy Award-winning journalist who covered Moscow, Cairo, Eastern Europe for the New York Times. He will share his take on President Donald Trump's actions with Congress, the courts, and the use of the military with civilian protests, as well as the Russian-Ukrainian war. What does he think? Well, it all means a lot for the future of U.S. democracy and relations with Putin and the rest of the world. So we hope you'll join us next month on July 23rd. Yeah, July 23rd. So, without much further ado, I do want to say the blue constitutions on your table, you may take those, compliments of Bellingham City Club. So right there. So I would like to introduce our moderator for today's presentation. Where are you, Jim? Before I stop, let's acknowledge Jim as his service for the presidency.
And thanks for taking over. So before I introduce our speaker, I do want to say those constitutions are there. Please take them. We have 120 and there's 160 or so people here. The plan is that if you're a couple, you might take one. We'd like them all to be used. So please take them, and it's from the AU, and there's a little section in there on Know Your Rights. So we hope you take them and use them and enjoy them. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Garrett Epps. He obtained his undergraduate degree from Harvard and served as the president of the Harvard. After graduation, he embarked on a 15-year journalism career, working for several newspapers, including the Washington Post. In 1988, at the age of 38, he entered Duke Law School, and after graduating from law school, began his career as a constitutional law professor at the University of Oregon. He has also served on the law faculties of American University, Boston College, Duke University, and the University of Baltimore. In 2020, Professor Epps returned to the University of Oregon, where he currently is a professor of practice. In addition to his faculty pursuits, in 2010, Professor Epps became the Supreme Court reporter for The Atlantic. and in that capacity attended approximately 600 Supreme Court arguments, writing more than 400 articles for the Atlantic. He is currently the legal affairs editor of the Washington Monthly, through which he co-hosts a weekly podcast. So please join me in welcoming Professor Epps.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for that generous introduction. I start with a couple of apologies. The first is that I'm going to tell you one of the four big lies. We know all the classic three, right? The lover says, "I'll marry you." The debtor says, "The check's in the mail." The government official says, "I'm here to help." The fourth is the law professor says, "I will be brief." I will try to be brief because I have a feeling, and I feel very profoundly, that what people in this room think about these issues is as important as what any member of the Mandarin class thinks. We are now engaged in a very broad period of social questioning of our values and our institutions. The second apology is, that I usually, I do a certain amount of speaking, and I like to show up with a nice typewritten thing in large type, and, I can read it'll say, "Now look to the right," and then I can do like this. That is really not possible. I want you to see my speech notes for today. Jim and I talked last week about what I would talk about, and I submitted a memo and so forth. And then in the week since then, the president has decided that the United States should join a war in the Middle East. And the Supreme Court issued a deeply bizarre and scary decision in a case called Department of Homeland Security versus DVD, which we can talk about later. So last night I was up until late, making these marks. And I woke up today and found in the news that the president has now decided he is not bound by the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974. He possesses the entire power of the purse. And that Emile Beauvais, who is currently the Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General of the United States, told meetings of DOJ lawyers that the administration planned to tell the courts that decided against it to F off. Mr. Beauvais, by the way, is the cream of this administration and has been nominated for a lifetime appointment to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And so that's today. Tomorrow we may get the decision in the case called Casa versus Trump, which is the birthright citizenship case, and which could turn out to be largely a procedural decision and could also turn out to be one of the most historic decisions in American history, and possibly not in a particularly good way. So if I seem less coherent even than usual, I apologize in advance. Jim and I, when we talked, we discussed a thing that happened to me years ago. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time in China during a period of relative liberalization as the professor in residence at a Chinese news magazine, an independent Chinese news magazine, which has now been suppressed, and worked with a generation of young Chinese journalists, many of them trained in the United States, all of them really brilliant, and also very brave, who were willing to put at a very early stage in their careers, willing to bet that this would not be, working for an independent magazine would not be a powerful strike against them. And the night before I left, I went to dinner with some of these young reporters, and one of them said to me very earnestly, I understand that in the United States, the principle is that the law binds the government as well as the subject? And I said, yes, that is the principle that we strive for. And this gave her a great deal to think about, you could tell. And then she finally said, that will never work in China. And I think that that anecdote illustrates the fact that there really are two concepts historically of what we call the rule of law. The older one is the concept that the sovereign issues the law and the subject is bound. That the duty of law is to obey commands from above, and that refusal to do so constitutes disorder and rebellion. The second principle of the rule of law is that law in general binds every participant, including the government, including powerful people, and that because of that, individuals can live their lives in a relatively predictable space where they know what is allowed and what isn't, and they know what has to be done in order to take their freedom away. And I think it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that the United States, in its history, has been the pioneer of this second concept of the rule of law, that since the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803, we have proceeded on the principle that the United States Constitution is not just a group of fine words, but that it binds every player in the system up to and including the president. That principle is in the process of being replaced by principles of authoritarian government, and I've just extracted from, is there anything I need to do about that?
Not yours, theirs.
There's no microphone
There is
here.
no microphone up there.
Is that on? Oh. Maybe it's just like ominous film music. That sounds good. I can take all the help I can get. The principles that are emerging are, first of all, that the President of the United States is entitled to all authority within government or against private people that he can attain by bullying, threatening, and bluffing. That he is not constrained in what he claims by any written list of powers or jurisprudence. That the government may act in adverse fashion against anyone for the offense of opposing or appearing to oppose the president. That the president can deploy the active duty military against peaceful protests in the United States if it is for a cause of which he disapproves. That federal law enforcement is not bound by any of the regulations we have taken for granted, such as the requirement to identify oneself, the requirement to wear a badge, the requirement to present a warrant, and that indeed federal law enforcement can act against anyone who gets in the way of the president's programs, which includes state judges, members of Congress, local mayors, U.S. senator, even a governor has been threatened for the crime of opposing mass deportations. And by opposing, I simply mean refusing to be part of the mass deportation effort. The state of California won't cooperate. And the idea is that we will put Governor Newsom in jail for doing that. I want to explore these through a number of topics. And the first, of course, I think is probably on a lot of people's minds, and that is the president's decision to take us into what certainly seems as if it might be a state of war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. In some ways, that's certainly of transcendent importance. In some ways, legally, it's the least interesting part of what's going on, because in behaving in this fashion, President Trump is simply carrying forward a trend that began 30 years ago and that has been fed by presidents of both parties over the past 30 years. I will say, however, and if people want to talk about it in the question period, I think we should, that even in this area where the executive authority has been expansive and relatively ill-contained, Trump's actions are somewhat shocking. But I want to look at a number of the other topics that have come up since the inauguration and sort of throw them out for people's consideration and see which ones you would like to talk about. And the first one is very close to my heart because I have spent many, many years writing about the 14th Amendment. And that is the executive order issued on the 20th of January, in which the president says he is, in essence, revoking the birthright citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment and substituting for it a truly bizarre, sort of statutory seeming list of who is a citizen and who isn't. And I think it's important, and this is why I'm braced for impact for tomorrow, I think it's important to understand that if this goes the wrong way, or what I consider the wrong way, it will undermine the very basis of the United States as a democratic society. Changing citizenship rules was one of the first things that was done in Soviet Russia, one of the first things that was done in fascist Italy, and one of the first things that was done in National Socialist Germany in order to give the government the tools to exclude those to whom it objected. The next thing is the executive orders targeting specific law firms for retribution by the president for things that don't even pretend to be legal offenses. They are there. They are in the orders. I don't mean this is like we divide. I know what you're thinking. It's written down on the piece of paper. We are doing this because you have sued the government. We are doing this because you have hired people the president doesn't like, it doesn't want you to hire. And we want money and control of your operations, none of which is authorized by the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution or the statutes that gives the president the power to operate or control private law firms. And I have to say that I am, for better or worse, the great-grandson, son, brother, brother-in-law, and father of lawyers. I have always been proud of my profession because of the idea guaranteed by the Sixth Amendment and by our system that the lawyer is an independent force outside of government who can intercede on behalf of the citizen when they are facing the massed power of government. And the idea that four of these giant law firms who have millions in assets, partners take home $20 million a year, that they knuckled under as soon as the president frowned at them and signed agreements promising to give him money, promising to send their young lawyers to go support causes that he supports. Even in this context, it is shocking. And I have to say that the firms that have stood up and resisted and are succeeding so far, do a little bit to rebuild my self-image. But I do think this is one of the most surprising and shocking developments of the Trump era. The president has tried to exercise, and to partially succeeded, the same level of authority over private universities. What the government has asked of schools like Columbia and Harvard and Penn is basically the right to operate the university in a way that the federal government regards as appropriate. They want control over hiring, curriculum, and admissions. I don't know what's left Okay, and I will say that I'm going to say something I very rarely say. And that is, as a graduate of Harvard College, I'm very proud that President Garber, I think, by standing up at a crucial moment and saying, we will not play this, we will not dance this dance, may have changed history. Certainly, I think, has altered the trajectory of the administration's efforts to control American society. And it is possible that, that they will win. We have an administration that takes upon it itself to attack federal judges for nothing other than the offense of deciding against the government, and has done its best to create an environment in which the tolerance for judges, there is danger to federal judges now. And the president has done nothing to limit this, and has repeatedly, by lies about specific judges, contributed to it. That's something that presidents didn't do, in my experience. We have the president creating something called the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, it's worth saying a couple of things. These are, a lot of times, these are just like home truths that we learned in civics, but they still are supposedly true. And that is, Congress creates departments. The principal departments of the executive branch are created by statute, not by presidential order. The heads of these departments are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. So you don't just go out on the street and see some billionaire shuffling by in a druggy haze and say, hey, dude, would you like to come and dismantle the federal government? That's really not constitutional government. One of the most shocking things to me that just has glided along because so much is going on is that the president has decided and has explicitly stated that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement branch of the Department of Homeland Security is going to target its enforcement operations against localities by which party they support. And it is being done, if you read the text of the order, it is being done specifically to prevent that party from winning elections, because the president says they are having non-citizens vote. I mean, the whole myth of the non-voting citizen is being deployed against the right of citizens to vote. The assault on immigrants, of course, is so broad-based as to be breathtaking. People are being deported without the slightest pretense of due process. A number of U.S. citizens have been deported wrongly. The government refuses to back off. I will say this, and if people want to talk about it more at the question time, we'll say it, but I am very struck. A lot of what I've written, when I wrote about the 14th Amendment, I wrote a history of the framing of the 14th Amendment. I studied the roots of it, which takes you back into the years before the Civil War. And one of the most interesting and searing causes of the Civil War, or at least controversies of the decade prior to the Civil War, was the controversy over the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This was part of the so-called Compromise of 1850. It was a compromise in which basically Congress gave the South everything they wanted. That was considered a compromise. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 gave private parties or federal officials the right to seize any black person on the street of a free state, hustle them into jail, and bring an action against them claiming that they actually were a fugitive slave. This claim was to be tried before a separate set of courts, not the regular courts of the state, not the federal district court, but a federal commission in which the commissioner was paid by the case $10 for every slave he ordered returned to the South and $5 for every slave that he ordered free, every black American. Soon, groups of bounty hunters, masked enforcers, slave owners, federal agents were roaming the streets of American cities, grabbing people, shuffling them away. There's a famous scene in the rendition of a fugitive slave named Joshua Glover, in which they burst into his house and he says, "Where are your papers?" And they say, "We don't have to show you anything." The echoes of that are quite vivid. Citizens began to resist. When the word went out that the slave catchers had grabbed someone, had hustled them into either federal custody or a private slave jail, because not only did they have a separate set of courts, a special set of courts, they had a special set of jails, slave jails, that they could use. They were operated by private contractors. I don't know if that sounds familiar. Eventually, this became a very complicated and searing part of the tensions that tore the country apart, because ordinary citizens said, we don't want to be implicated. We don't want to be forced to be involved in the process of reinforcing the institution of slavery. And the federal government said that under the law, not only can you not do anything to stop it, you must cooperate and help catch slaves if you are ordered to by a federal agent. Now, I think the parallels are, I think I can basically just leave them there. But I do think that this is a very important development, and we've just begun to see it operate. The question is, what do we do? And I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that despite what we all learned in school, our institutions, our checks and balances, our judges will not save us. And we learned that last year when the Supreme Court issued one of the most shocking decision of my career as a constitutional lawyer, in the case of Trump versus United States, in which they said that the president is immune from criminal prosecution for any acts he commits as president. Now, if you ask Chief Justice Roberts, he'd say that I'm lying to you, that that's not what they said at all. They said, of course the president is not immune. He can be prosecuted for his unofficial acts. What are a president's unofficial acts? Well, I'm not going to tell you. Instead, he said, in the first instance, the court must determine whether the acts are official or unofficial. Well, what that means is that if you charged a former president with a crime committed in office, he could move to dismiss the charges on the grounds that his acts were official, and that would have to go up to the Supreme Court for decision before the prosecution could proceed. Now, I don't know, as I say, I've had some involvement in federal criminal procedure, but I don't know if any prosecutors are here today. But in my experience with prosecutors, they are loath to bring a prosecution where they think they cannot win. It's a tremendous waste of resources and of the prestige of the office and of the time of the staff. I don't think any president will ever be charged with anything when they know that before you could even get the case before a jury, it has to go through at least one and possibly two sets of appeals. And I think that even with this degree to which the court has bent the knee to the executive, the administration stood up in front of the court, in this case, the birthright citizenship case, Casa versus Trump, and refused even though asked repeatedly, refused to state that it would follow a decision of the United States Supreme Court in any case but the specific one brought in front of it. Now, what does that mean? That means if I bring a lawsuit against the United States and I say, I'm a birthright citizen, your birthright citizenship rules are unconstitutional, and I win, well, if the Supreme Court affirms my victory, then the Supreme Court will say, fine, here's your citizenship papers, but we are not going to recognize the citizenship of anyone else. And the Solicitor General said they can bring their own lawsuit. That would be a precedent that we would probably follow. So you can see that we're pretty far down the road to the sort of general lawlessness among the institutions, the attack on the lower courts, the Supreme Court's seeming inability to muster itself to resist the objectives. And I think it is just true that our institutions are not going to save us. If we want to get out of this situation, if we don't want to turn into something more like Hungary or Myanmar, we need to do it. No one's coming to rescue us. And as I wrote this, I remembered a quote from the great Judge Learned Hand in a speech called The Spirit of Liberty, in which he says, this is 1944, I often wonder whether we do not rest our hopes too much upon constitutions, upon laws, and upon courts. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. While it lies there, no constitution, no law, no court can save it. So we as a people are being tried by a very determined effort to take from us something that we regard as our birthright, freedom, and the principle that law binds the sovereign as well as the subject. And it's an important struggle. It may be the most important historical moment any of us live through. And I found myself last night thinking of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his special message to Congress in 1861, where he said, "My fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor unto the last generation. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth." Thank you. With that, I'd like to take questions. Jim's going to handle the questioning.
Those of you who don't know, Professor Epps' book is for sale by Village Books, and it will be signed afterwards if you'd like it signed. There's also other good reads from our friends at Village Books for anybody who wants to go deeper. Mm-hmm.
It's for sale at full price, but with signature, there's a discount.
Okay, before you take questions from the audience, we on the committee have one for you, and it's a pretty general one. What actions do you recommend that those of us who are here in the audience and members of the public generally in Bellingham County who are alarmed by the overreach of the Trump administration and committed to preserving the rule of law where the law binds the sovereign, what actions do you recommend we could take?
You know, I think that's a wonderful question, and I have done a good deal of thinking about it because, you know, I was trained as a constitutional lawyer to think that what you did was got an order from the court and things would work themselves out and the executive would obey it and so forth. So that my first trick, you know, is a flop. So the question is, how do we get there? How do we mobilize in a way that's effective? And it depends on everyone, all the kinds of people that are in this room. And we have to do it in a number of ways that are political. And the first thing I think that's important, particularly for people in a state like Washington or Oregon where I live, is that we need to strengthen and monitor and make sure our state institutions are healthy, that they have the spirit that they need to fulfill their purpose of giving us the opportunity to set policies at the local level, rather than to ask whether Donald Trump would like what we're doing or not. We do have this situation in which local officials, state officials are being threatened and indicted in federal court. And I think we have to make sure that our state government knows that it is the will of their people that they stand up, because the pressures that are being brought against states are just overwhelming. You consider that Governor Mills of Maine told the president she wouldn't comply with the transgender athlete order, and received a notice the next week that they were cutting off all funding for all kinds of federal programs in Maine and beginning an investigation. So state officials need your support. They need to understand that it is the will of the people of Washington that they not become part of the Please Trump at Any Cost caucus. And I think that has to do not simply with letting them know, but also taking part. One of the things that people are doing now is going to their member of Congress's town halls. And the fact that we are in a blue state doesn't mean that it doesn't mean anything, that members of Congress need to hear this is what we are concerned about. We are not letting this pass in silence. And I think it may mean becoming involved in politics. I think it means affirming what it really means to be an American, speaking out publicly. And I say that sounds trivial, but it's not. It's not. It is somewhat troubling to see the extent to which the power of the federal government is being masked to be used against people who even criticize it. And so, we've all got to hitch ourselves up and just say, I am not going to be intimidated. When the FBI comes to my door, which is happening around the country, because they find out I've been at a demonstration, or that the FBI comes and says, we want to talk to you. We have to be ready for that. And we have to bear witness to these ideas, write to your members of Congress, write to your legislators, write to your local papers, and just say, this is not what being an American is. We are not going to be quiet. There's the very famous quotation from William Lloyd Garrison, who started the Liberator, the great anti-slavery newspaper, who said in the first issue, I will not compromise, I will not be silent, and I will be heard. Make yourselves heard. What you do is just as important, more important maybe, than what people like me do. And I know it's kind of a cheerless prospect. There's no victory parade at the end of it necessarily, but we have to do it.
We have 3 microphones, and we have our first question over here.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk more about the right to peaceably assemble, and those of us that are struck about the contradiction, pardoning the Proud Boys on January 20th and sending federal troops into a predominantly peaceful demonstration in Los Angeles.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. I think everybody heard it. What is going on with the right of peaceable assembly? And I think the fact of the matter is that has under a kind of assault that is somewhat unprecedented since the civil rights years. And that's not simply from the top, but also in a number of state and localities. I remember, and I don't know how many people remember this, there's only so much room you have in your brain for outrages, right? You have to have other things like puppies and, kitten videos. Otherwise, what's the point? But if you remember what happened in Graham, North Carolina, just before the 2020 election, when a peaceful march of civil rights marchers, black, were marching to the polling place to vote. And a sheriff's deputy said they were using an unauthorized sound system, and the troopers waded in with their clubs and arrested and beat, including a woman in a wheelchair who was beaten unconscious, on the grounds that this was an unlawful assembly because they were using the wrong sound system. Things like that are happening much more often than we would like to think around the country. We have states that have changed their laws or considered changing their laws to make it not an offense to run over a protester with your car. Speaking of pardons, we have the governor of Texas pardoning a man who shot another man at a Black Lives Matter protest. I think that, use it or lose it. We have to make, at the time of the framing of the Constitution, at the early years of the Republic, they used to talk about what was called the people out of doors. And this was a part of the political system. If the government did something that people didn't like, they came out of doors. And they let the government know, we don't like what you did. And the so-called Insurrection Act, the first Insurrection Act that was passed, was actually remarkably limited compared to the Riot Act of Great Britain. The Riot Act in Britain said, and I think still says, that anybody, any official of the king, could read a proclamation saying, "Our sovereign lord the king orders that you disperse and return to your places of hesitation on penalty of whatever," and then they could arrest people and either execute them or imprison them. The framers of the first federal laws made an Insurrection Act that required the president himself, right? In other words, the local U.S. attorney or whoever could not proclaim an unlawful assembly. That's now morphed into the Insurrection Act, which gives the president, unfortunately, a great deal of wiggle room in how he uses it. But we have to, I think that, we have to be the people out of doors. We can't wait and use it when things get really bad because it'll be too late. I hope that's a helpful response,
So when and if we get out of this and we get back to a normalcy, how does the judiciary enforce their actions? The executive, the Congress has means of doing that. Judiciary has no teeth. And this has been really obvious now. It'd be more obvious if the judiciary was more on the liberal side. What do we do?
Well, I think that that's a very important question to which I have no comprehensive answer. I will say a couple of things. I think it's very striking, and I wrote a piece a couple of years ago about the Constitution in the first Trump administration. And I thought that one of the really striking things about Trump's first term and his use of the pardon power was that the first pardon he issued very early in his term was to Sheriff Arpaio of Maricopa County, Arizona. And Sheriff Arpaio had been convicted of criminal contempt of court because he refused to follow a direct order to him from the federal district court to stop profiling Latino citizens or residents of Maricopa County and shaking them down to see if they were citizens. That's not, the Supreme Court had held that was not a power that the state of Arizona had, and that Arpaio didn't have the power to order those deputies to carry that out. And a federal court had found him that he was doing that and issued an order naming him and saying, "You will stop doing that," to which Arpaio said, "I won't," and continued to do it until the court had him prosecuted by a special prosecutor for criminal contempt. And the conviction was actually, celebrated by a number of people in Arizona. But very early in his second term, Trump pardoned him, and I thought that was a signal being sent to the courts. It was obviously I think, politically popular with the people who don't like Latino immigrants. But I think it was also a signal to the courts that I don't have your back. And I know the Judicial Conference of the United States has been very concerned about judicial security. And the question is, what do we do? Well, I think it's really important, and this is true across the board, not just in this area, that we not adopt this kind of mantra that I see online all the time, where someone, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's someone else, will say, the president has violated such and such, such and such. And someone immediately responds, what difference does that make? His base doesn't care. I don't want to see that, right? The law matters because it's law. And it matters to say the president is violating the law because eventually these things may come home to roost, right? And one of the points that Jim made that was floating around in my head, but that he focused much more, is that the lawyers like Mr. Beauvais, who carry out these actions, who defy the courts, who lie to the courts, well, maybe the courts can't send the marshals to arrest them. At present, the courts still have that power. But maybe the president will tell the marshals not to do it. Those lawyers still face the possibility of professional sanction from their local bar. You all remember Mayor Giuliani, America's mayor. Now America's ex-lawyer. He does not have credentials to practice anymore because he lied to a court, and the New York State Bar lifted his ticket. My old friend John Eastman, who came up with the idea that that if you just when they count the electoral votes, if you just put your finger in your ears and go, "I'm not listening to you," then the president doesn't lose the election. He has been disbarred, or is in the process of being disbarred by the California bar. These are very serious sanctions. And I thought it was interesting, we were talking about this last night, that very soon after Pam Bondi became Attorney General, her brother, who is a established Washington lawyer, and with quite a respectable practice, announced that he was running for head of the DC bar. Now, obviously, that would put him in a situation to be of benefit to her. And, he ran, and there was a spirited campaign, and he narrowly lost by a vote of 35,000 to 3,400. So, the legal profession is a resource. And it's not all up to the judges. And again, it's a question of bearing witness. Whether in whatever field you're in, bearing witness to what is true, bearing witness to what is law, and trying to staunch the flood of lies that we are being subjected to.
We have a question over here.
If the 2026 election results in flipping the House of Representatives to a different party, would that have an effect on altering the Trump agenda?
I think unquestionably, yes. The House, the administration can't enact a lot of its financial and tax policies without both houses. I mean, let us assume, for the sake of argument, that Democrats take over the House and that they have the spirit to stand in the way. I mean, there are voices in the Democratic Party saying, "Oh, don't oppose him," just sort of say, "We'll deport fewer people than he," or we will arrest fewer local officials than he. The Democratic Party has to be ready to fight for these things we care about, and that's something, going back to the first question I was asked, that's something that we can influence. It's not just in red states, or blue state Democrats need to hear. We need an opposition that really opposes. America was really the first Western country where the idea of an opposition attained a constitutional legitimacy. And one of the things that people tend not to know about the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 is that at the time when Congress acted to outlaw criticism of the president, it wasn't at all clear in terms of legal thought that opposing the president and trying to prevent his reelection, that might actually be treason. That might actually legally be treason. That was not an invented thing. One of the really interesting things about that episode is that, Jefferson and Madison carried on this magnificent correspondence their whole lives. There are 3 volumes, which I recommend, called The Empire of Liberty, of their letters back and forth. And there is a period between the passage of this Sedition Act and the election of 1800 where the letters stop. Because Jefferson, I think, there's not written down anywhere, this is my inference. Jefferson understood that his letters would be opened by federal officials and read and could be used as the basis for a prosecution for treason for which he might be executed. And it really is the Alien and Sedition Act's controversy that established the idea that you can have an opposition in the United States or in a country, and it's legitimate as long as it takes its role within the constitutional system. We have to fight for that idea. We have to make sure our party officials are not intimidated, because there's a Democratic senator who's now decided he really likes MAGA. I mean, we have to make sure that there really is an opposition that is ready to not just talk, but do things when they have the chance. Right now, I know a lot of people are like, they're writing their congressman now and saying impeach Trump. I don't know to what extent that does us any good at all. Right? And we don't have the votes to impeach him. But there are situations in which we may be able to peel off 1 or 2 votes. Notice that, for example, in the what I call the big beautiful, right, or what we might call the bunker buster after the war in Iran, a number of the provisions that were put in it by the House that were designed to defang district courts, to take away from them their their power to issue contempt orders and so forth, have been ruled out of the bill by the Senate parliamentarian. But we got to make sure they don't fire the Senate parliamentarian. Right? They're going to try to fire the Congressional Budget Office because it's independent. They're trying to place political controls over the Library of Congress. That must not be allowed to happen. The National Archives has announced as of this week it is no longer open to the public. These institutions are under pressure. We have to fight for them. It's a lot of fights. It's not just one big one. Does that, I feel like I just rambled around. Does that answer your question at all?
We have another question over here.
Thank you for being here. One of the most frightening things that's happened in my voting career is Citizens United, which I think was the Pandora's box that could lead us directly here. I'd like to hear your comments about that connection.
I think Citizens United was a very bad decision, and I think it exists. It's not by itself. It exists in the context of a long string of case law in which the decision was gradually made by the court that they would treat contributions and expenditures as precisely equivalent to the law of speech. Right? People say that Citizens United is what's wrong with it is it recognizes the rights of corporations. Corporations aren't people. That's not it at all. That is not what's wrong with Citizens United. What's wrong with Citizens United is it says that the people have no right to control the space in which their elections are conducted, to make sure that they are not dominated, by 1 or 2 voices. And, it goes back to a case called Buckley versus Vallejo in the 1970s, in which the Supreme Court said that you could not have regulations of campaign finance that were designed to provide a level playing field, that this was unconstitutional. And the court says, in that opinion, the notion that the government can muffle some voices in order to enhance the power of others is wholly foreign to the First Amendment. I was like, wholly foreign? What are you talking about? What are you nuts? I mean, how many people have been to a city council or county council meeting? Right, and with the comments, you have like the comment period? And how many minutes do you get? You get 3, you get 10, it depends, right? What if at the end of your 3 minutes you said, well, you can't cut me off. I intend to talk for the rest of the time. Because if you try to cut me off, you are violating the First Amendment. And even more, ask yourself the following. Suppose you get to a county council meeting and somebody stands up and delivers a speech about why you should pass this bill. And then you get up to answer it. And as soon as you do, all the supporters of the bill stand up with kazoos and go, drown you out. And you say, I need you to be quiet because I need to make my point. No, you can't do that. The First Amendment protects our right of kazoo. It's just wrong at the conceptual level. And it's a whole series of decisions, not just Citizens United. There's a really interesting case that had to do with whether the Congress can limit the number of contributions that someone can make to federal candidates in a given election cycle. And just read it to realize how far down the road, down the rabbit hole of just craziness, this jurisprudence has gone. The Chief Justice writes that there's a real question of fairness here. Real quick, because rich people are very busy being rich. Now, ordinary folks who have time on their hands can go volunteer to their local candidate. So they're fine. But rich people can't do that. They're too busy being rich. And so they have to be able to give money. And it has to be in a relatively unlimited amount. Otherwise, it's unfair because Bruce Springsteen can come in and have a fundraiser and raise $10 million, whereas rich guy no one's ever heard of can't give $10 million, and he's being oppressed. He's being discriminated against. And this is the frame of our campaign finance jurisprudence today. It's like, for the love of God, we have to be completely fair to the rich. They suffer so for the rest of us. And I think we need to fight against this. I think that, there is, I got into trouble, with my progressive friends because I went to a meeting and said, your constitutional amendment will do no good at all. They have a constitutional amendment they want to sponsor that says corporations are not people, they don't have the rights. I said, any second-year law student could write the Supreme Court opinion saying, fine, we accept that, but you still can't limit contributions because they're not about the corporation, they're about the right of hearers to hear the speech. And if you read Citizens United, you will see that that's a great deal of discussion is about how this rule really protects the ordinary citizen because they get to know what Exxon thinks about energy and so forth. I think we're in serious trouble. I think that the domination of politics by people with large amounts of money is a very malign force. I think basically has eaten the Republican Party that we used to know. But the truth of the matter is, one of the questions that people ask is, why are the Democrats not as bold as we think they should be? And without regard to any particular question of whether they should be bold here or there, overall, the Democrats have to get money from the same people who fund the Republicans. You can't, unless you're a very unusual person like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or, Bernie Sanders, who comes from Vermont, where there are only 6 people anyway, and they get together and say, Bernie, you have to be senator again. Oh, damn it, I was hoping I'd come home and be governor. No, but people like that with a very unusual base. But if you are Chucky Schumer, if you are Dick Durbin, you have to go with your hand out to the same kind of people who are funding the Republican Party, and you may feel constrained in the extent to which you can oppose them. So it's a real problem. It's something we really need to deal with. I think the first thing we have to establish is that we still have free speech and so forth for individuals. You know, I wrote a thing that I thought was very funny 20 years ago where I said, you know, the next decision after Citizens United will be a decision that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment incorporates the right of free speech, but because it's incorporated, it's only for corporations. Individuals don't have. We're very close to that now.
Hello. Question, if I may, shift it to media, and you as a reporter, and I was one too. I'm disappointed in what's happened in coverage of the administration, that it hasn't branded the GOP for what it seems to be, perhaps to many people in the room. Disappointment in the media, what's to be done?
Well, you know, I think two things about that. The first overall contextual statement is that the media is always disappointing. I worked for the Washington Post and I disappointed myself all the time. You would run into things, you know, the editors would say, you can't say that, you can't do this, you haven't proved it, you haven't gotten the story. And there is a pressure, a kind of centrist pressure not to go too far in any one direction, which makes it hard to report on extreme phenomena. And I noticed this morning on the Washington Post website, it said that, you know, the story that I mentioned, that Trump has decided he's no longer bound by the Impoundment Control Act. And the subhead on the webpage, anyway, I don't know what, on the printed paper, said, you know, the president seeks to rebalance the spending power, right? So there is this internal pressure to compromise. I mean, I remember, oh golly, 20 years ago, I got a call from my old paper, The Post, that said they wanted me to review a book by the late Kenneth Starr, if you remember Ken Starr, and I said two things. I said, first of all, he's a friend of mine, but secondly, I think he did some very bad things as independent counsel, and I was critical of him at the time. In the context of an article that I said, I basically said, I think he's a guy with integrity, I think he's making mistakes. They said, oh, well, we can't let you review the book then because the conservative groups would be very upset. So, you know, conservatives are very, very adept at working the ref in this regard. And what can we do about it? Well, I think constant criticism has to be the lot of the media. You can never let up, right? Letting them know that you think that they have disappointed you in certain ways. That is worth doing, writing the letters to the editor, calling the reporters. The other thing, of course, is that we have a situation now where a lot of the major media outlets are owned by people who are susceptible to pressure from the administration. And if you see, you know, the Los Angeles Times was one of the great papers in the history of American journalism. It had, you know, good and bad chapters, but it was a terribly important force in Southern California. Now it is owned by someone who has made it clear that he wants to be sure we do not get on the bad side of President Trump. The Washington Post, which was owned when I was there by, you know, a family, the Graham family, that were, you know, this was an immediate post-Watergate era, and they were very determined to keep the paper independent as a source of criticism of both parties. And when that became financially unsustainable, when it became clear that the Graham family could no longer single-handedly subsidize the paper, they went out and found someone who had enough money that they felt, and who said he was going to, maintain the independence of the Washington Post as the sole owner, and sold it to Mr. Bezos. And Mr. Bezos has now changed his mind. He has now become a friend of President Trump. He has done something that I never thought I would actually see, and that is issue a list of acceptable opinions to be written about in his opinion pages. You have to write about personal liberties and economic free markets. And he says people who oppose these will have to write somewhere else. I mean, even growing up in the segregated South, our newspapers didn't do that, you know. So a lot of what has to be done is constructing alternative media spaces. I wish that weren't true. I wish there were some way to snap the Post out of it. But, you know, I think things are getting worse there, not better. And, you know, you're quite right. But we have to keep the channels open so that we can get facts out to people. And in that regard, I have to say something that has really begun to bother me, which is we all know that misinformation is all over the web, that a lot of it is put out by people who seem to be Russian bots or so forth, you know, that is information that, you know, like the picture of a crowd in Venezuela burning a city, and they said this is the Freddie Gray riots. There's begun to be this similar flood from the other side. And I've noticed, you know, for example, these memes that quote Pope Leo is saying, you know, Trump is a poo-poo head. And, you know, he didn't say that, right? And I, you know, am probably going to get thrown off Facebook, not by Meta, but by just lack of friends, because whenever I see one of these, I say, this is not true. Check your facts. It is possible to check facts on, you know, there are some very fine websites, Snopes.com, factcheck.org, where you can check and see whether these things that sound so wonderful, you know, the reason Trump attacked Columbia and Penn is because Barron Trump didn't get into Columbia or Penn. That's just not so. We have no evidence at all. And I don't want to spend my declining years thinking things are true that somebody in a bot factory has dreamed up because they know that it'll emotionally make me feel good. I really want the internet to be a source of facts, and we need to do everything we can. You know, when you see something going on, I mean, one of the most powerful things that's happening right now are these citizen videos of people being kidnapped by ICE, right? And citizen videos of police actions and so forth. You know, step up. I mean, the upside of the down is that there's an opportunity for ordinary people to make a contribution to our media universe that wasn't there. It wasn't there even 25 years ago. So I wish I could tell you that, you know, the prospects are bright, but I'm not sure we have to yield that space entirely.
Question over here.
Thank you. It's my understanding that military personnel take an oath to the Constitution, not the president.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly what we're hearing is that the military has taken unconstitutional actions at the president's behest. I recently spoke with a gentleman who has extensive knowledge of military protocol and practice,
Mm-hmm.
and expressed my concerns around this. And he said members of the military have three options when this happens. One is they can quit if they don't like what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Two is they can comply.
Mm-hmm.
And three is a coup. And can you speak to that?
Well, you know, why don't you ask a broad question? I think that a couple of things are going on. That one of for the first time I'm aware of, and certainly in modern history, probably since the Civil War, we are seeing an attempt to purge the military of one political viewpoint. And that's certainly when you look at what Secretary Hegseth did to the chiefs of staff and so forth, it seems to have a partisan slant to it. I mean, you know, he did decide that, he looked at the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, let's see, 12 white men, 1 black man, and 1 white woman. Okay, you two out. Okay. And you had a situation where the president went to Fort Bragg to speak, and the commanders agreed to his desire to have only soldiers who supported him, only soldiers who favored him politically in the audience. And that was bad enough. But then he said, no fat soldiers either. I'm like, okay. It's on, man, you know. So, you know, I think that should have been resisted. I think that the commander should have said, Mr. President, I can't do that. I can't ask, you know, what my soldiers political commitments are. But the number of times where people can sort of just flatly say, you're asking me to do something illegal, is pretty small, because the law, there's a lot of leeway in the law, right? So, for example, the president ordering the 700 Marines into Los Angeles. Well, there is some law that says you can do that, and some law says that you can't. And in that situation, it's a lot to ask of an individual service person that they put their future and possibly their freedom on the line for something that's not clearly established. On the other hand, I think that there are aspects of the American military that are reflective of some really wonderful things about our society, and that the American military, by and large, and certainly this has happened, I think, since I came of age, I mean, so the last 50 years, has become a force for democracy on the whole. So we have to offer support. I mean, there are organizations that are there that say, service personnel, if you are asked to take an illegal action, call this number, we'll defend you. Things like that have to be done. There has to be pushback. But right now, I don't see the problem as coming from the military. I see it's coming from the civilian side. You know, I don't think of Pete Hegseth as a phenomenon that arises out of pathologies of the military. I think he comes out of, you know, Fox News and certain things like that. And so for the moment, I'm not, the things that keep me up at night, the military is not high on that list. Eventually it may be. I mean, I think that the fact that we have this Jack in office as Secretary of Defense, when they said after the raid on Tehran, they said that Secretary Hegseth was going to hold a briefing for the press at 8 a.m. the next day. And somebody, you know, who heard that said, I hope they have their hangover remedies for him. He really is not someone who really should be exercising that level of responsibility. And so, you know, that's something we have to worry about. But as I say, right now, I'm a lot more worried about ICE. I'm a lot more worried about the Department of Homeland Security. These are places that are already explicitly politicized.
So we have a question
right
over
here. I think it's our turn.
No need to fight.
I'm thinking about international kinds of implications. And my question is, do you see any unexpected quarters where help might come from international quarters? You know, I know the Danish prime minister has spoken out, the Croatian prime minister, the French, you know, they're all speaking out because they're outside of this bubble. But could there be an unexpected event or quarter that might change the course of things?
Could there be something unexpected? Yeah, I expect so. I don't know what it would be, right? I do think that we live against an international context. It's not possible to ignore that. And that to the extent that this administration takes actions or makes statements that cause difficulties for our traditional allies, the way they react and the effect that has on political and economic conditions is important, right? I mean, I think if you consider that, you know, when candidate Trump began saying we needed to take over Canada, the Canadians, bless their friendly and law-abiding hearts, said elbows up, right? Elbows up, mofo. And it created conditions inside Canada that changed, I think, the results of their election. And I think it has now had an impact on American policy toward Canada. We begin to read statements in the press that, yeah, well, really, the president was never serious about that. He really wants Greenland or whatever. So, yeah, but I don't think it'll ever be anything that we can just point to and say, look at that. You know, I think the context, I think the extent to which leaders attempt to use their relationship to the United States to keep us in the lanes of international law. I think that's very important.
So over here, there is a question.
Regarding the 2026 election,
Yeah.
Do you have ideas about what we're going to face, about attempts by the administration to control both the vote and the counting of the vote, and what we might be able to do about it?
I think that that's a very important question, and I think there are three things to look at about that. Right. The first is the executive order issued by the president in which he instructs every state to change its voter registration proceedings, require certain level of identification for voter and so forth. The president has no shred, no hint, no shadow, no hair, no whisper of authority to issue instructions to the states for how they conduct their elections. Congress can do it, for federal elections. The president is just not, he's not in the game. And so that has to be resisted really, really strongly. And I think that, a lot of the blue states will just tear it up and throw it away. That's what it deserves. On the other hand, you may see pressure within red states to comply with the president's instructions, and that will make it even harder to vote in those places than it already is. In addition, each individual red state, a lot of them, are taking actions that will bring the bodies that do the election counting and supervision of elections under political control. You saw that happen. It happened in Georgia. It's just happened in North Carolina when, they were not able to get Mark Robinson elected governor. Mark Robinson ran on a platform that women shouldn't be allowed to vote, but turns out that's not popular with maybe as much as half of the electorate. Who knew? But they did that by passing a law over the governor's veto that took complete control of the state elections board. The governor has no more power to appoint that and so forth. So we're going to see attempts to meddle in the election counting. And then the third thing, of course, is the pending legislation, the so-called SAVE Act, that is pending in Congress, that would, among other things, impose various onerous rules of proving your citizenship. My mom, I remember when Indiana was the first state that began imposing some of these rules, and what they did at that time was very mild compared to what's being proposed now. And I sat down with my mom, who was born in 1922 and had voted in every election since 1944. And we determined that under the Indiana law, she wouldn't be able to vote because she had changed her name twice. Once was as a young child, her name was changed from Rosalie Suzanne to Roseanne by deed poll, and that was recorded. But then she changed her name when she married my father. And so she wouldn't be able to prove that she was who she was supposed to be, and she wouldn't be allowed to register to vote. So you can see that these restrictions have a lot of very negative implications. They are targeted to some extent. I think women are the target of a lot of them. And we really need to make sure that this doesn't pass. And it's very important to understand that while the Republicans may have a majority in both houses, that's not necessarily, that's not a statement, involving blocks of ice. These are people who, many of them will head for the exits if they begin to see that the good ship Trump is headed for the rocks. And so opposition to these things is very important. But I think you're right. I think someone once said that the conduct of the Trump administration is inexplicable if you consider it as the action of a group of people who think they will have to face the voters. I think there is a fairly strong element within the administration that wants to change the election system. Remember Donald Trump said, just vote for me once and then you won't have to vote anymore? I think that, the man spoke truer than he knew.
it's working? Yes, okay, question over here.
Hi. A few years ago, many of us celebrated Ketanji Brown Jackson becoming a justice. And I have thought of her many times about how crushing this must feel on a daily basis. But I'm wondering if there are tactics, tools, or strategies that the liberal justices have in a time like this.
Well, it's fascinating, you know, and even though I was a Supreme Court reporter for 10 years, I never got inside the organization, right? The Supreme Court is not an organization where you like get, people leaking to you or anything like that. So I'm observing the behavior of people. And what's fascinating to me is to think of the difference between Justice Jackson and Justice Sotomayor on the one hand, and Justice Kagan on the other. Because Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson have chosen what I think is a very honorable choice of just saying, look, and if you read Justice Sotomayor's dissent in the DVD case that I mentioned earlier, the case that was decided last Thursday, she just says, it ends up by saying, in sadness, I dissent. I mean, that this is lawless, what the court is permitting. Justice Jackson has, if anything, even a sharper tongue. She doesn't personally impugn her colleagues, that's a mistake, but she just lays it out. And those are really important things. One of the things you do when you write a dissent is you think, and this is not me making it up, it's Supreme Court law. You're writing the majority opinion of 25 years from now. You are bearing witness to constitutional truth. And certainly the conservatives used that tactic at a time when they were outvoted. Now, Justice Kagan has chosen another path. She often votes with the six conservatives. But, she's one of the few members of the court that I actually know. And, I wouldn't say we were chums or anything, but she is someone whose values I trust, and I believe she is conducting herself honorably according to a strategy that has already perhaps borne certain fruit. I think that in the case, Sebelius case, the case about whether the Affordable Care Act was constitutional or not, I think that she sat down with Chief Justice Roberts and said, look, I'll support you on the Medicaid thing if you vote to uphold the individual mandate as an exercise of the taxing power. I think it was just a very straightforward transaction. And the result of that was that the Affordable Care Act was not struck down in its entirety. So I think we see things like that going on behind the scenes. Now, which strategy is more effective, I don't think we'll know. I don't think we'll know in my lifetime. When the papers of the justices come out, we will know. I myself, someone said once about me, it's like the thing I like about you is that when you're offered the chance to light one single candle, you'd much prefer to curse the darkness. And I think that basically is a description of me. And so for that reason, I find Sotomayor and Jackson's conduct appealing. But they are acting entirely within the tradition of comity and courtesy that this court is used to dealing with. And nothing they have written is as rude as most of, the worst opinion, the meanest opinion that Ketanji Brown Jackson has written is not as mean as the average note to the milkman that Antonin Scalia wrote. So God bless them, and let's hope we can get some people on the court who will offer them some support.
Garrett, we are out of time, and on behalf of the City Club, want to thank you. Thank Jim. What has gone on behind the scenes for these two working on this program, it's hours and hours. As Garrett said, it's been kind of a moving target. and he was scribbling on notes just before he went up today. So thank you for the effort. Thank you, Jim, for your effort.